What if the suffering that tears your soul apart in this life is not a sign that you are broken, but serves as irrefutable proof that you have fallen into a trap? What if the sacred concept of reincarnation, which you were taught to perceive as a divine gift of a second chance, actually represents the most sophisticated prison, a hell not of flame and brimstone, but of endless, agonizing repetition of the same mistakes, the same lessons, the same soul wounds? Let me tell you the story of how it all began. Someone awakens in a world that seems painfully familiar, though memory claims otherwise. Each day brings a sense of déjà vu, as if the soul is living through a rehearsed script written by the invisible hand of a cosmic playwright. Morning coffee has the same bitter taste of disappointment as always. Relationships develop along the same destructive patterns as in some vague memories that cannot belong to this life. Traditional spiritual teachings offer comfort in the idea of reincarnation as a second chance, as an opportunity to correct past mistakes. But what if this concept is not a blessing, but a curse? What if instead of ascending the ladder of spiritual development, the soul is stuck in an endless labyrinth of repetitions, where each new life is merely a variation on the theme of old, unresolved traumas? A person looks in the mirror and sees not only their reflection, but also the ghostly features of those they might have been before. The eyes carry an ancient weariness that doesn't match the years lived. The hands remember movements they were never taught in this life. The heart aches for people it has never met and places it has never been. Reincarnation becomes not a spiritual gift, but a cosmic reset button that plays the same movie over and over again. Each death becomes not liberation, but merely a transition to the next act of the same tragedy. The soul doesn't learn, doesn't grow, doesn't evolve. It simply repeats rehearsed movements in new scenery. Samsara is a word pronounced with reverence in spiritual circles, like a sacred mantra of liberation. But behind the poetic veil of Eastern philosophy hides a ruthless machine of cosmic justice that grinds souls with the mechanical precision of clockwork. The wheel of samsara doesn't stop, doesn't slow down, shows no mercy to those caught under its millstones. The soul is reborn, not because it has achieved enlightenment, but because it still sleeps the deep sleep of ignorance. Each new incarnation becomes not a reward for spiritual achievements, but a punishment for unwillingness to awaken. Cosmic justice works on the principle of ruthless pedagogy. The lesson is repeated until it is learned, even if it takes thousands of lives. The mechanism of samsara works like a sophisticated torture machine that uses not physical pain, but existential suffering. The soul is born with amnesia, forgetting the lessons of previous incarnations, and begins learning from a clean slate. But subconscious memory preserves behavioral patterns, emotional reactions, deep fears and desires that push it into the same traps. Thirst, attachment, anger, pride, envy. These mental formations are transmitted from life to life like viruses of consciousness that cannot be eradicated by simple intention. They are built into the structure of the soul so deeply that they seem an integral part of personality. A person thinks they are changing, growing, evolving, but actually just rearranging furniture in the same room. The wheel of samsara rotates with hypnotic monotony, creating an illusion of movement with complete absence of progress. Souls circle in this cosmic dance, like planets around the sun, following given orbits that seem like free choice, but actually represent iron chains of karmic laws. The most terrifying thing about this system is that it works automatically, without conscious supervision, without possibility of appeal or sentence review. Cosmic justice is blind, not in the sense that it is fair, but in that it doesn't see individual characteristics, doesn't consider circumstances, shows no compassion to those caught in its mechanism. Children are born with pure eyes, but sometimes ancient wisdom flickers in their gaze that cannot belong to such a young being. A 3-year-old suddenly starts speaking a language they never studied, or shows inexplicable fear of water, though they never drowned in this life. Musical prodigies at 5 play the most complex pieces, as if their fingers remember movements perfected in previous incarnations. These fragments of past lives break through the amnesia of birth, like cracks in a carefully constructed illusion of new beginning. Inexplicable phobias, innate talents, instant connections with strangers. All these are shards of a broken mirror of the past that cut the present with sharp edges of unresolved experiences. Karma works not as a system of moral accounting, but as cosmic glue that binds souls to their unfinished lessons. Each unworked emotion, each unhealed trauma, each unclosed matter becomes an invisible thread that pulls the soul back into physical realm. Death doesn't break these connections, but only makes them temporarily invisible. Soul contracts are made not in heaven, but in moments of deepest suffering, when the soul swears to understand, forgive, heal what destroys it. These promises become magnetic force that attracts souls to each other across centuries and continents. A stranger in the subway might be an ancient enemy with whom karmic debt must be worked out. A chance meeting in a cafe might be a carefully orchestrated cosmic appointment. The most insidious thing about this system is that it works below the threshold of consciousness. People feel inexplicable pull to certain places, people, situations, not understanding that fragments of their soul's memory are trying to surface. They take these impulses for personal preferences, for coincidences, for quirks of personality, not suspecting that threads of past lives weave the fabric of their present. Emotional patterns repeat with mathematical precision. One who was betrayed in a past life will subconsciously seek betrayers in this one. One who died of loneliness will panic and cling to any relationships, even destructive ones. Soul memory works like a broken record that plays the same painful melody over and over again. Children who remember past lives often describe not magical adventures, but ordinary tragedies. They remember not the moment of enlightenment, but the moment of death, not achievement, but loss, not joy, but suffering. This is because precisely unresolved suffering creates the strongest imprints in soul's memory. Precisely unclosed emotional wounds become anchor points that don't let the soul move forward. The illusion of progress represents the most sophisticated trap in the mechanism of samsara. Souls convince themselves that they are moving forward, learning, evolving, while in reality, they are merely changing the external scenery of the same inner drama. A person can move to another country, change profession, find new love, but core patterns of their behavior remain unchanged, like genetically encoded programs that launch automatically under certain conditions. This time, everything will be different. This phrase sounds like a broken mantra from the lips of those caught in cycles of repetition. They sincerely believe in the possibility of change, not understanding that the very belief in the necessity of external changes is part of the trap. The soul seeks escape not where it is, taking symptom for cause, effect for source. Relationship patterns repeat with clockwork precision. One who escaped from a controlling partner magnetically attracts the next controller, only in more subtle form. One who broke free from addiction finds new, more socially acceptable ways to escape from reality. One who resolved family trauma creates a new family with exactly the same dysfunctional dynamics, only with reversed roles. The most insidious thing about this system is that it uses natural human tendency toward self-improvement as fuel for its perpetuation. Each desire to become better, each striving for growth, each attempt at healing becomes a new turn of the same spiral. The soul thinks it's climbing the ladder of evolution, but actually moves on a circular escalator that creates illusion of vertical movement with complete absence of real progress. Spiritual seekers are especially susceptible to this trap because their quest seems most noble and pure. They meditate, read sacred texts, attend retreats, accumulate spiritual experiences, but fundamental structure of their consciousness remains unchanged. They change vocabulary from material to spiritual, but core motivations, desire for control, escape, validation, remain the same. Cosmic irony lies in the fact that the more effort the soul applies to escape from the cycle, the tighter the trap becomes. Each attempt to break free creates new karma. Each resistance generates new attachment. Each movement away from pattern creates equal and opposite movement back to it. This is a law of spiritual physics that operates regardless of intentions and awareness. Cycles become increasingly subtle and sophisticated with each iteration. What in one life was crude addiction to alcohol, in the next might transform into refined attachment to spiritual experiences. What was obvious sexual obsession might transform into sublime romantic idealization. But essence remains the same: soul's inability to be content with what is, constant seeking of what lies beyond present moment. Western religious tradition offers its followers a linear narrative with clear beginning, middle, and end. After death, final judgment, definitive verdict, eternal destination. Heaven or hell, salvation or damnation, but in any case, finality. There is something almost comforting in this binary simplicity, in knowing that after death, the corridor will finally lead to the final door, behind which lies permanent resolution of all earthly struggles. Eastern wisdom, on the contrary, paints a picture of endless corridor without exit, where each death becomes merely transition to the next room of the same endless maze. No final judgment, no permanent resolution, no ultimate escape, only eternal recycling through various forms of existence. This is not a corridor with door at the end, but circular hallway where each turn leads back to starting point. The difference between these worldviews is not simply theological, it is fundamentally psychological. Western mind, raised on linear thinking, can comprehend punishment if it has an endpoint. 1,000 years in hell, terrible but measurable. 1,000,000 years, unimaginable but still finite. But concept of infinite repeating cycle breaks human ability for mental processing of punishment. Western hell, however terrible it might be, assumes that suffering has meaning in context of larger plan. This is punishment for specific sins. This is justice. This is moral order of universe. But Eastern samsara offers suffering without inherent meaning, without cosmic purpose, without moral framework. Simply mechanical process of cause and effect that continues because it continues. The paradox lies in the fact that Western tradition, which seems more harsh with its concept of eternal damnation, is actually more merciful because it provides soul's opportunity for final rest, even if this rest is in torment. Eastern tradition, which seems more compassionate with its promise of eventual liberation, is actually more cruel because it guarantees no endpoint at all. Time in these systems works completely differently. Western eternity is extension of present moment into infinity, but this is still recognizable temporal experience. Eastern cyclical time is negation of the very concept of time, where past, present, and future collapse into meaningless repetition. This is not eternal moment, but eternal recurrence of moment that has already lost any significance through infinite repetition. Psychological impact of these different afterlife concepts is profound. Western believer can fear hell, but he can also hope for heaven. Eastern spiritual seeker cannot truly fear or hope because both emotions assume endpoint that may never come. Instead, only grim determination remains to continue cycle, hoping against hope that eventually awareness will awaken enough for escape from this cosmic treadmill. The most disturbing realization is that Western tradition offers escape through death, while Eastern tradition suggests that death itself is part of the trap. In Western framework, Physical death is doorway to resolution. In Eastern framework, death is only changing costumes for next performance of the same play. The greatest cosmic joke lies in the fact that precisely what Western religions fear as ultimate punishment, eternal repetition of suffering, Eastern traditions accept as natural order of things right here in the physical world. What Christianity calls hell and considers worst possible fate, Buddhism calls samsara and views as starting point of spiritual journey. This is not simply difference in terminology. This is fundamental reversal in understanding nature of punishment and liberation. Romanticized version of reincarnation, popular in New Age circles, presents each new birth as exciting adventure, as chance to meet soulmates, as opportunity to explore different aspects of being. But if we honestly look at mechanism of this process, disturbing question arises. If soul truly learns and evolves through multiple lifetimes, why does it continue returning? Why doesn't process complete after achieving wisdom? Why don't enlightened souls remain in higher realms forever? Traditional explanation is that souls choose to return from compassion to help others achieve liberation. But this explanation has fundamental flaw. If system truly works, if souls are truly learning and evolving, then quantity of enlightened beings should exponentially increase with each cycle. Instead, we see constant level of suffering, constant level of ignorance, constant level of spiritual blindness in world. More honest interpretation is that souls return not from choice, but because they are trapped. Reincarnation happens not because soul wants to return, but because it cannot leave. Each death becomes not graduation, but simply changing classes in same eternal school, where lessons never end, where graduation never occurs, where students remain trapped in system that promises progress, but delivers only repetition. Key question becomes this: would you prefer to face consequences of all your actions immediately and completely, experiencing full intensity of results of your choices in compressed period of time? Or would you rather experience them in fragments, scattered across multiple lifetimes, diluted but endless, hidden in faces of strangers you think you never met? Western model offers intensive course, all consequences compressed in single eternal experience. Eastern model offers extensive program, same consequences spread across infinite series of partial experiences. But if total amount of suffering is same, then extensive program becomes more cruel precisely because it denies finality, it refuses closure, it maintains hope that may never be fulfilled. Imagine prison where inmates are told they will be released when they learn necessary lessons. But lessons constantly change. Criteria for graduation remain vague, and no one ever actually sees anyone graduate. Such system is more torture than straightforward life sentence, because it adds psychological dimension of false hope to physical dimension of incarceration. Reincarnation, viewed through this lens, becomes not spiritual gift, but cosmic imprisonment, where sentence is never read completely, where terms are never fully explained, where possibility of parole keeps inmates compliant, but never actually materializes. Most disturbing aspect of this system is that it uses hope as instrument of torture. Each new birth brings renewed optimism that this time will be different, that lessons will be learned, that cycle will be broken. But this hope itself becomes part of trap, creating attachment to idea of progress that prevents actual recognition of nature of situation. Soul becomes addicted to cycle precisely because each iteration promises that next one will be the last. Scientific community looks at concept of reincarnation with cold distrust of materialistic worldview, demanding measurable evidence for phenomena that by their nature transcend physical measurement. Consciousness, according to mainstream science, is emergent property of brain activity, complex chemical and electrical process that ceases with biological death. No transportable essence, no immortal soul, no mechanism for transmitting memories or personality traits between different biological vessels. Strict protocols of scientific research leave no room for anecdotal evidence, for emotional testimonies, for cultural beliefs that cannot be replicated in controlled laboratory conditions. Documented cases of children who remember past lives with disturbing accuracy are dismissed as products of overactive imagination, as results of unconscious absorption of information from environment, as coincidences that human mind tends to interpret as meaningful patterns. Researchers have tried to apply rigorous scientific methodology to study of reincarnation claims, interviewing children who describe previous lives, verifying details of their stories, searching for historical records that could confirm their statements. Some cases prove remarkably accurate. Children describe people, places, events they never could have known through normal means. But science requires not just accurate information, but reproducible mechanism of its transmission. Without identifiable physical process that could transport consciousness from one body to another, scientific community remains skeptical. Brain imaging technology shows that memories are stored in specific neural networks, that personality traits correlate with particular brain structures, that consciousness appears integrally connected with biological substrate. When brain dies, these networks decay, structures deteriorate, substrate ceases to function. Quantum physics is sometimes invoked as possible explanation for consciousness survival, with theories about quantum entanglement or information storage in zero-point field. But these speculative theories remain on edge of legitimate science, lacking experimental verification that could satisfy rigorous standards of peer review. Mainstream scientific consensus remains firm. Consciousness requires physical brain. Memories need neural networks. Personality depends on biochemical processes. Cultural anthropologists offer alternative explanation for reincarnation beliefs. Societies that embrace these concepts often have strong collective memory, detailed oral traditions, shared mythological frameworks that provide template for interpretation of unusual experiences. Child who claims to remember past life may be unconsciously absorbing cultural expectations, responding to social cues, constructing narrative that fits established patterns of community belief. Psychological researchers identify various cognitive biases that may contribute to reincarnation claims. Confirmation bias leads people to notice evidence that supports their beliefs while ignoring contradictory information. Pattern recognition tendency causes humans to see meaningful connections in random events. Memory reconstruction allows people to unconsciously modify their recollections to fit desired narrative. Most significant challenge to reincarnation claims comes from neuroscience research that demonstrates that personality, memory, consciousness are closely tied to specific brain regions. Traumatic brain injuries can dramatically alter personality traits. Alzheimer's disease progressively erases memories. Psychoactive substances can temporarily modify consciousness. If these mental phenomena were truly independent from physical brain, such changes should not occur. Skeptics also point out statistical problems with reincarnation claims. If souls actually reincarnated on regular basis, mathematical probability suggests that most people should have some memories of past lives. Instead, such claims remain extremely rare, concentrated in particular cultures, often emerging during periods when children are exposed to specific cultural information about death and afterlife. Despite rigorous investigation, science cannot definitively prove that reincarnation is impossible, only that no credible mechanism has been identified for such process. Absence of evidence, however, does not constitute evidence of absence, as frequently noted in scientific discourse. But burden of proof remains on those who claim extraordinary phenomena, and so far, such proof has not been provided. Even if we discard literal interpretation of soul transmigration, concept of reincarnation gains disturbing relevance when applied to psychological patterns within single lifetime. Human psyche demonstrates remarkable ability to create cyclic repetitions of behavior, relationships, emotional responses that mirror mechanism of traditional samsara with frightening precision. We don't need multiple lifetimes to experience endless repetition. We create it every day within boundaries of one existence. Cognitive loops form in early childhood as survival mechanisms, primitive responses to threatening situations that become hardwired in neural pathways. Child who learned that emotional withdrawal keeps him safe from unpredictable parent will unconsciously repeat this pattern in adult relationships even when threat no longer exists. Original trigger disappears, but response mechanism remains active, creating perpetual cycle of avoidance and isolation. Psychological reincarnation manifests in how people repeatedly choose partners who recreate familiar patterns of pain. Woman who escaped abusive father magnetically attracts abusive partners, not because she consciously enjoys suffering, but because familiar pain feels more comfortable than unknown happiness. Her psyche reincarnates same dynamic again and again, changing actors but maintaining script. Addiction represents perfect example of psychological reincarnation. Each relapse becomes death of old resolved self and birth of new using self. Promise of sobriety creates hope that this time will be different, that lessons were learned, that cycle will be broken. But underlying psychological structure remains unchanged, and same patterns recreate themselves with depressing regularity. Recovery programs acknowledge this phenomenon, describing addiction as cunning, baffling, powerful force that always seeks return, despite conscious intentions otherwise. Career patterns also demonstrate cyclic nature of psychological reincarnation. Person leaves job because of toxic boss, only to find themselves working for another toxic boss in different company. Each job change feels like fresh start, new opportunity, chance for different experience. But if underlying psychological vulnerabilities remain unaddressed, same dynamics recreate themselves in new environments. Family patterns transmit through generations, not through supernatural means, but through psychological inheritance. Children unconsciously absorb emotional patterns of their parents, learning coping mechanisms, defense strategies, relationship models that they later reproduce in their own families. Each generation promises to be different, to break cycle of dysfunctional behavior, but without conscious awareness of underlying patterns, history repeats itself with mechanical precision. Mental health community recognizes this phenomenon through concept of repetition compulsion, unconscious drive to recreate familiar situations even when they cause pain. Therapy becomes process of identifying these cycles, bringing unconscious patterns into conscious awareness, developing new responses to old triggers. But even successful therapy doesn't guarantee permanent change. Psychological reincarnation requires constant vigilance, ongoing commitment to breaking established patterns. Most insidious aspect of psychological reincarnation is that it operates below threshold of conscious awareness. People genuinely believe they are making free choices, pursuing new experiences, growing and changing. They cannot see that they are simply rearranging furniture in same room, changing superficial details, while core structure remains identical. Each repetition feels novel because memory minimizes painful aspects of past experiences, emphasizing hopeful elements that justify trying again. Contemporary psychology describes this phenomenon through various frameworks: trauma bonding, attachment disorders, cognitive biases, neural plasticity. But regardless of theoretical model, underlying mechanism remains same. Human psyche tends to recreate familiar patterns even when those patterns cause suffering. We become trapped in cycles of our own creation, convinced that next time will be different, while unconsciously ensuring that it remains same. What if all this apparent horror of cyclical existence is not cosmic mistake, doesn't represent divine punishment, but serves as precisely calibrated instrument of transformation? What if samsara functions not as prison, but as intensive training program, where each incarnation is carefully designed to provide exact experiences necessary for soul's evolution. Perspective shift from victim to student radically transforms nature of perceived suffering. Precision educational system requires not comfortable experiences, but challenging ones. Muscle grows only under resistance. Character develops only through adversity. Wisdom emerges only from mistakes and their consequences. If souls are truly eternal beings engaged in long-term development project, then temporary suffering in service of greater understanding becomes acceptable cost, even necessary component of process. Each lifetime becomes specifically designed curriculum rather than random punishment. Karma in this framework ceases to be vengeful force and becomes sophisticated feedback system, cosmic cause and effect mechanism that ensures perfect alignment between actions and experiences. Not punishment in traditional sense, but natural consequence, like gravity or thermodynamics, impersonal law that operates with mathematical precision for maintenance of cosmic order. Every experience becomes precisely what soul needs for next stage of development. Educational metaphor explains many puzzling aspects of traditional reincarnation theory. Why do enlightened beings continue returning? Because they become teachers, advanced students helping others navigate same challenges they already mastered. Why do some lives seem particularly difficult? Because advanced souls take on more challenging coursework, higher-level problems that require greater spiritual maturity for resolution. Suffering in this context loses senseless quality and gains purposeful dimension. Physical pain teaches compassion for others' suffering. Emotional loss develops appreciation for love. Financial hardship creates understanding of value and resourcefulness. Relationship conflicts provide opportunities to practice forgiveness, patience, unconditional love. Each challenge becomes spiritual exercise designed to strengthen specific capacities soul needs for its continuing evolution. Amnesia at birth also gains educational function. Students who remember all previous lessons aren't challenged to develop new solutions, aren't forced to rely on inner wisdom rather than external knowledge. Fresh start in each lifetime forces soul to discover its inherent capacities, develop authentic responses to problems rather than simply applying memorized solutions. Forgetting becomes feature, not bug, of system. Cyclical nature of existence in this interpretation becomes spiraling rather than circular. Each return brings soul back to similar situations, but at higher level of understanding. Same fundamental lessons appear repeatedly, but with increasing sophistication, greater complexity, deeper implications. Soul doesn't repeat exactly same experiences, but explores variations on themes, developing mastery through multiple perspectives on core issues. Free will operates in this system as creative force that allows souls to choose specific ways they engage with predetermined challenges. Basic curriculum may be fixed, but methods, timing, intensity can vary according to individual choice. Soul becomes co-creator of its experience, working within cosmic constraints to shape specific form its education takes. Most radical implication of this perspective is that it suggests current suffering is temporary discomfort in service of eternal joy. Educational process has natural endpoint: graduation, mastery, completion of coursework. Unlike punitive model, which offers no hope of release, educational model promises eventual transcendence through accumulated wisdom. Cycle becomes not eternal trap, but progressive journey toward ultimate freedom. This shift in perspective doesn't minimize reality of pain or suggest that suffering should be passively accepted. Instead, it reframes experience in context of larger purpose, providing meaning which sustains soul through difficult periods. Student can endure challenging course because he understands goal, sees progress, trusts system, even when individual lessons seem pointless or cruel. Final transcendence in film occurs not when loop ends, but when character reaches state of complete acceptance, perfect love, selfless service. At that moment, when he fully embraces repetition rather than resisting it, cycle spontaneously dissolves. Not because external mechanism breaks, but because driving force, resistance, attachment, self-centered wanting, no longer operates. This cinematic metaphor perfectly illustrates nature of authentic liberation. Samsara continues operating, wheel keeps turning, but awakened consciousness no longer caught in its mechanism. Not because consciousness escapes wheel, but because it recognizes its true nature as space in which wheel appears. Ocean is not trapped by waves that rise and fall on its surface. Waves are temporary modifications of ocean's essential nature. Revolutionary awareness recognizes that consciousness itself never was born, never dies, never reincarnates. What appears as cycle of birth and death represents shifting patterns in eternal field of awareness, like dreams arising and dissolving in sleeping mind. Upon awakening becomes clear that dreamer never was affected by experiences of dream characters, never was in danger from dream disasters, never needed escape from dream prison. Practical implications of this revolution are profound. Daily life continues with same external activities, but internal experience transforms completely. Fear of death dissolves when recognized that what appears as death represents simply changing costumes in eternal play of consciousness. Suffering loses compulsive quality when seen as temporary weather patterns in infinite sky of awareness. Compassion naturally arises not as moral obligation, but as spontaneous recognition that apparent others are expressions of same consciousness which appears as self. Service becomes natural expression of awakened understanding rather than effort to accumulate good karma. Love flows unconditionally because recognition of inherent unity transcends artificial boundaries between giver and receiver. Most important realization is that liberation is available in any moment, regardless of circumstances, past experiences, spiritual preparation. Revolution of consciousness doesn't require years of meditation, study of sacred texts, following spiritual practices. Can occur instantaneously through simple recognition of true nature of awareness. Wheel of samsara still turning, but those who awakened no longer ride it. They observe it, serve within it, play in its patterns without being captured by its illusions. Final irony is that seeking escape leads deeper into trap, while complete acceptance dissolves prison walls. Revolution occurs not when consciousness fights cosmic system, but when it recognizes itself as source and substance of that system. In that moment when seeker disappears in seeking, prison reveals itself as playground, suffering transforms into compassion, cycle becomes dance. Wheel continues turning, but now we have awareness sufficient to finally step off it, or recognize that we never were on it in first place.